17th of March, we get together as a school to celebrate the anniversary of the founding of Bristol Grammar School. This is called Charter Day. But where did it all begin? This is a matter of some conjecture, though there are a few clues available. This is the charter for Bristol Grammar School, awarded by King Henry VIII on the 17th of March 1532. At the time of the charter, we believe there was already a school noted as being the Grammar School in a separate document dated 1512, as well as a schoolmaster, Master Thomas Moffat. In 1513, the will of David Layson gave specific reference to his new house, that he
latterly held in Christmas Street, wherein Thomas Moffat, schoolmaster, now dwelleth.
In 1532, the Bristol City Council's account books stated that Mr. Moffat of the grammar school had
a room over the Froom Gate, which he hath rent free for the teaching of childer.
So our first master, Thomas Moffat, was a schoolmaster in Christmas Street 20 years before the date of the charter. C.P. Hill, in his History of Bristol Grammar School, published in 1951, asks,
was Robert Thorne founding a wholly new school, or merely assisting the transfer of an existing one to a more commodious quarters? Unless new evidence comes to light, no definite answer is possible.
Though he would have found these extra pieces of the puzzle most interesting. So, to the charter itself. Drawn up in 1532, it states in Latin,
Henricus Octavus, Dei gratia Angliae et Franciae Rex, Fidei Defensor et Dominus Hiberniae, omnibus ad quos presentes literae pervenerint, salutem, sciatis quod nos considerantes prium propositum dilectorum nobis Tome West militis Domini Lavar, Georgii Croft Capellani Nostri, Roberti Thorne, Nicolai Thorne, Wile Nostrae Bristoliae, et Johannes Godric, Clerici, Executoris Testamenti Roberti Thorne Defuncti.
And translated, this means,
Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England and France, Defender of the Faith and Lord of Ireland, to all to whom these present letters shall come, greeting. Know ye that considering the prior proposition of our beloved Thomas West, Knight, Lord Lawar, George Croft, our chaplain, Robert Thorne, Nicholas Thorne of our town of Bristol, and John Godrich, clerk, executor of the will of Robert Thorne, deceased.
You will already know the names of Robert and Nicholas Thorne, but have you heard of these names? Thomas West, Knight and Lord Loire, was old nobility, and in 1526 had given magnificent hospitality to King Henry VIII, though later was suspected as an opponent of the king's religious changes, and in 1538 was sent to the Tower. He was later released after handing over one of his largest estates in lieu of a fine. George Croft was not so lucky, and, being indiscreet enough to deny the king's supremacy over the church, and unable to pay any fine as he has no estates, he was executed in 1539. The Thorne brothers moved with the times, the Reformation, the new religion, and are now remembered as our founders and benefactors.
The coat of arms of Nicholas Thorne in the middle, and the coat of arms of his second wife, Bridget Miles, is still there. The coat of arms of Mary Bigston, his first wife, has mysteriously vanished. We don't know when or how.
The Thorne brothers knew Moffat, knew the school, and their intention was to make provision to the school to have a permanent home and a permanent endowment. And this is exactly what, on the 17th of March 1532, the Charter gives to what became known as the Free Grammar School. As part of the Charter, the house or hospital of St Bartholomew's, originally a monastery, was to be given over to the school. George Croft, the master and keeper of the hospital, and Thomas West, patron and founder of the hospital, were instrumental in making the building available to be turned into a school by the Thorne brothers. That's why they are listed in the Charter. Though we don't know the exact date of the move to St Bartholomew's, it was most likely before 1546. So, who went to the school? Middle-class boys living within the city boundary. Where the school is now is outside the city boundary, so you would be living within the city walls and the immediate surrounding areas, the city centre, Broadmead, round to Queen Square, and possibly as far up as St Michael on the Mount. The school was founded by the Thorne brothers to give an education in literature and good manners to middle-class boys who would become Bristol merchants and continue their tradition of trading, exploration, and associating with royalty in matters to do with England's role in the global economy. Consequently, the boys would be taught Latin and Greek literature. They were to receive the education of a gentleman. They weren't being taught maths, French, Spanish, or English. The first time we have a curriculum was not until the scheme of 1662, which included Latin, Greek, a little Hebrew, as well as mandatory church attendance on Sundays and the ability to discuss the church service, the prayers, and the sermon. It was not until the 19th century that this curriculum could be altered. When Nicholas Thorne died in 1546, he left in his will many seafaring instruments and his library, mostly Latin books, Greek books, and geography books. These were areas of interest for a merchant of that period. The school stayed at the Bartholomew's until 1767.
The Bartholomew's had been a prime position in 1532, very much the city centre. But a couple of hundred years later, mid-18th century, it was less desirable. People were moving out, away from the river, to more attractive suburbs. And the Bartholomew's was very dark, possibly by now a little cramped, and it was very, very near the River Froom, which was then of course open, and the harbour, and it was the centre for rats, cholera, and all things unpleasant. Now, some years before, the new school, Queen Elizabeth's Hospital as it now is, QEH, had desirable premises built for it in Unity Street, a few hundred yards up the hill. Our new headmaster, Charles Lee, liked the QEH building very much and exerted what would now be called undue influence, and QEH was persuaded, ultimately by an Act of Parliament, to exchange buildings. So the Bristol Grammar School, then the Free Grammar School, moved up to the new and pleasant premises in Unity Street in 1767, and QEH was moved to the Bartholomews, where they stayed until the 19th century.
However, despite the new buildings and extra space, Lee managed to reduce the school to the point where it was effectively closed, so few were the numbers attending. The City Council took action and appointed another headmaster, Master John Joseph Goodenough, who unfortunately only made things worse. He wanted to keep the numbers low so he could also run a parish and draw two incomes. Several replacements followed until we reach 1860 and the appointment of John William Caldecott. He was an enthusiastic teacher and really wanted the school to do well. His ambitions included his wish for a larger building purpose-built. He wanted room for the school to expand and he wanted playing fields. Though organised sport was not part of the curriculum, it was popular and definitely happening in other schools at the time. He convinced the governors of the school to sell Unity Street and to purchase the site at Tyndall's Park, which was part of the Royal Fort Estate. 3 new buildings were put up: the Great Hall and the rooms underneath, the Headmaster's House, which is now the main building of the Infant and Junior School, and a small porter's lodge on the corner of Elton Road and Elmdale Road. At this time, the curriculum was changing. More subjects required more teachers, and the new suburbs of Clifton, Cotham and Redland were being built filled with middle and upper class families, and therefore boys to fill the school, boys who would go on to attend university and then become doctors, lawyers and similar professions. It was therefore the perfect location for a school. So in 1876 the current site was purchased, buildings erected, and Bristol Grammar School moved in 1879. Those first years in the new building were very different to how you know and see them now.
This was the seat of the headmaster, J.W. Caldecott, who had masterminded the move from Unity Street to Tyndall's Park, and he would sit in that seat and oversee the teaching, because the Great Hall was originally built not as a dining room, not as a concert hall, but as the teaching room, with 16 classes held every day in this one room.
Teaching out to the 300, 400, 500 pupils, sat in rows before them, taught under heavy discipline. The Great Hall was designed acoustically to enable separate learning environments within one large space. The sixth form had lessons in the rooms under the Great Hall. This didn't last long, however, as the new way of teaching was to have classrooms for all ages, and so more rooms were required. And so we have the Fenwick Richards wing, the Winterstoke wing, University Road block, Elton Road, and the Princess Anne building. The list goes on and on. All the buildings you now know on this site, including the acquisition of the row of buildings along Elton Road, were all to reduce class sizes and allow for greater overall numbers in the school. Although teaching was still occurring in the Great Hall right up until the 1950s. The school flourished under Caldecott, but then slumped again under Leighton, possibly due to the economic climate at the time. In 1906, Cyril Norwood was appointed headmaster. He turned the school around, got it back on the track Caldecott had seen for it, as the outstanding academic school in Bristol, and BGS has never looked back. In fact, BGS has always changed with the times. It was one of the earliest boys' schools to become fully co-educational, accepting girls at all ages from 1980, more than 40 years ago. To summarise, the Charter of 1532 by the Thorne brothers, Lord Lewar and George Croft, endowed us with money and a building, the Bartholomews. The school then moved to Unity Street, then to Tyndall's Park. So the Great Hall and this current site is a successor to that original endowment we received under the Charter. To this day, we still have that endowment of a building and some money
in the foundation, continuation and support of a certain grammar school in the said town of Bristol, for boys and girls to be taught good manners and literature. Roll on 2032 and our 500-year celebrations.